What happens when a royal guest completely loses control on live television in front of millions of viewers? It only took 41 seconds of heated conversation for Prince Harry to explode into a shocking outburst that left viewers absolutely stunned and host Alison Hammond fighting to keep her composure on This Morning. Last night, the nation witnessed something truly extraordinary. An exclusive behind-the-scenes look at what really went down during that explosive interview reveals a side of the Duke that no one saw coming. This is the untold story of how one of Britain's most beloved morning show hosts faced down a royal meltdown with grace, professionalism, and unshakable determination. The morning started like any other at the This Morning studios. Alison Hammond arrived early, her usual bright energy filling the green room as she prepared for what was supposed to be a straightforward interview about Prince Harry's latest charitable endeavors. The production team had been excited about landing such a high-profile guest, and everyone expected a warm, engaging conversation that would give viewers insight into the prince's humanitarian work. But from the moment Prince Harry walked through those studio doors, something felt different. Gone was the charming, approachable royal that audiences had grown to love. Instead, there was a tension in his shoulders, a sharpness in his eyes that immediately put the crew on edge. Makeup artists whispered among themselves as they noticed his clenched jaw during touch-ups. Camera operators exchanged worried glances as he sat rigidly in the interview chair, his usual easygoing demeanor nowhere to be found. Alison, ever the professional, sensed the shift in energy but maintained her trademark warmth. She had interviewed countless celebrities and public figures over her career, and she knew how to navigate difficult personalities. What she didn't know was that she was about to face the most challenging interview of her entire career. The cameras began rolling at exactly 9:30 that morning. Alison's opening was flawless, her smile genuine and welcoming as she introduced the prince to the millions of viewers tuning in across the country. She spoke about his upcoming charity events, his recent projects, and his commitment to various causes close to his heart. The audience at home settled in with their morning cups of tea, expecting the usual delightful conversation that made This Morning such a beloved part of British television. Prince Harry's responses started off measured but strangely formal. Where viewers might have expected his characteristic humor and relatability, instead, they got short, almost robotic answers. When Alison asked about his recent visit to a children's hospital, a topic that should have brought out his natural compassion, his response was clinical and detached. "The visit was productive," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "We achieved our objectives and the children benefited from the attention." Alison's eyebrows raised slightly, but she pressed on with professional grace. "That sounds wonderful, Harry. Can you tell us about any particular moments that stood out to you? I'm sure our viewers would love to hear about the children you met." The prince shifted in his chair, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Irritation, perhaps, or impatience. "I don't think it's appropriate to single out individual cases for entertainment purposes," he replied curtly. The studio fell silent for a heartbeat. Even the usually bustling production area behind the cameras seemed to pause. This wasn't the Harry that Britain knew and loved. This was someone else entirely, someone defensive and hostile where there should have been warmth and openness. But Alison Hammond didn't become one of Britain's most respected television hosts by backing down from challenging moments. She leaned forward slightly, her voice remaining steady and kind. "Of course, I completely understand the need for privacy. I was simply thinking that sharing some positive moments might inspire others to get involved with similar causes. That's what This Morning is all about, bringing communities together and encouraging people to make a difference." Prince Harry's response was immediate and sharp. "I think I know what my charitable work is about without needing television presenters to explain it to me." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop 10 degrees. Crew members exchanged shocked looks. This was live television, broadcast to millions of homes across Britain, and one of the most senior members of the royal family had just delivered what could only be described as a cutting insult to their beloved host. Alison's smile never wavered, but those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes. She was a professional through and through, and she had dealt with difficult guests before, but this level of unprovoked hostility was unprecedented. Still, she maintained her composure with the skill that had made her a household name. "Absolutely," she said smoothly, "and we're so grateful that you take the time to share your passion with our viewers. Speaking of passion, I know mental health awareness is something incredibly close to your heart. Can you tell us about your recent initiatives in that area?" It was a perfectly reasonable question, delivered with genuine interest and respect. Mental health had been one of Prince Harry's most publicized causes, something he had spoken about openly and emotionally in previous interviews. It should have been safe ground, a topic that would allow him to showcase his commitment and connect with viewers who might be struggling with similar issues. Instead, Prince Harry's face darkened visibly, his jaw clenched, and when he spoke, his voice carried an edge that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. I find it interesting that you think you can just ask me about personal topics like that. Do you have any idea what it's like to have your private struggles turned into morning television content? Alison blinked, clearly taken aback by the intensity of his response. She had asked the same type of question in dozens of interviews over the years, and guests typically appreciated the opportunity to discuss causes they cared about. But something had clearly struck a nerve with the prince, and the interview was rapidly spiraling into dangerous territory. "I apologize if the question seemed intrusive," Alison said carefully. "I was simply interested in hearing about the positive work you're doing in that space. Many of our viewers find inspiration in hearing how public figures overcome challenges and use their experiences to help others." Prince Harry leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more hostile by the second. "Positive work?" he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think turning personal trauma into public entertainment is positive work?" The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Alison Hammond, who had built her entire career on creating warm, supportive spaces for guests to share their stories, had just been accused of exploiting trauma for entertainment. It was not just unfair, it was a complete mischaracterization of everything she stood for as a broadcaster. But rather than respond with the indignation that would have been completely justified, Alison chose the path of grace and professionalism that had defined her career. "Harry," Alison said softly, her voice carrying the kind of gentle authority that had made her a trusted voice in British households for years, "I think there might be a misunderstanding here. This morning has always been about creating a safe space for important conversations. We're not here to exploit anyone's experiences. We're here to listen, to learn, and to help our viewers feel less alone in their own struggles." Her words were measured and sincere, delivered with the kind of emotional intelligence that separated truly great broadcasters from the merely competent. She was offering Prince Harry a graceful way out, a chance to reset the conversation and return to the positive discussion they had all hoped for. Instead, Prince Harry doubled down on his hostility. "A safe space?" he scoffed, his voice rising slightly. "You call ambushing people with personal questions on live television a safe space? You call turning someone's mental health journey into morning show content a safe space?" The word ambushing hit the studio like a physical blow. Alison's team behind the cameras looked genuinely shocked. They had provided Prince Harry's representatives with a detailed list of potential topics weeks in advance. Mental health had been specifically approved as a discussion point. There had been no ambush, no surprise attack. This was simply a professional interviewer doing her job with the same respect and preparation she brought to every guest. Alison's smile remained in place, but her voice carried a slight firmness now. "I can assure you and our viewers that every topic we're discussing today was pre-approved by your team. We always work closely with our guests to ensure they're comfortable with the direction of our conversations. That's been our standard practice for years, and it's how we maintain the trust our audience places in us." It was a perfectly reasonable response, factual and professional. Any reasonable person would have recognized their mistake and perhaps apologized for the misunderstanding. But Prince Harry was clearly not in a reasonable frame of mind. "Pre-approved?" he snapped, leaning forward aggressively in his chair. "So you think getting permission from handlers gives you the right to pry into people's private lives? You think a piece of paper makes it okay to turn personal pain into entertainment?" The accusation was not just unfair, it was insulting to everything Alison Hammond represented as a broadcaster. She had spent her career treating every guest with dignity and respect, creating conversations that informed and inspired rather than exploited. To suggest otherwise was a fundamental mischaracterization of her professional ethics. But Alison refused to take the bait. Instead of responding with anger or defensiveness, she chose compassion. "I can see that you're feeling frustrated, and I want to make sure you know that's never been our intention. If you'd prefer to talk about something else entirely, we're completely flexible. This is your time, and we want you to feel comfortable using it however feels right to you." It was a masterclass in de-escalation, the kind of response that showed why Alison Hammond had earned the respect and admiration of colleagues and viewers alike. She was offering Prince Harry complete control over the direction of the interview, abandoning her prepared questions in favor of his comfort and well-being. Most guests would have been touched by such consideration. Most people would have recognized the olive branch being extended and accepted it gracefully. But Prince Harry seemed determined to remain combative. "My time?" He laughed bitterly. "This isn't my time. This is your show, your agenda, your narrative. You invite people on here so you can put words in their mouths and twist their stories to fit whatever angle you're pushing that day." The production team was now openly staring. This wasn't just hostile behavior from a difficult guest. This was a sustained attack on the integrity of one of Britain's most beloved television programs and its host. Camera operators continued filming, but their expressions showed the discomfort everyone was feeling. Alison took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet strength that resonated through the studio. "Harry, I have to respectfully disagree with that characterization. In all my years doing this job, I've never put words in anyone's mouth or twisted anyone's story. My role is to ask questions that help our guests share what they want to share, in the way they want to share it. That's what good interviewing is about." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "But I can see that you're having a difficult morning, and I want to make sure we handle this in a way that feels right for you. Would you like to take a brief break? We can pause the cameras, give you a few minutes to collect yourself, and then continue when you're ready." It was an extraordinarily generous offer. Live television breaks were expensive and complicated, requiring precise coordination between multiple departments. But Alison was willing to disrupt the entire production schedule to ensure her guests felt supported and comfortable. Prince Harry's response was swift and cutting. "Collect myself?" he repeated incredulously. "You think I need to collect myself? Maybe the problem isn't that I need to collect myself. Maybe the problem is that you need to learn how to conduct a proper interview without attacking your guests." The word attacking landed like a slap across the studio. Alison Hammond, who had shown nothing but grace, professionalism, and genuine care throughout the entire interaction, had just been accused of attacking her guest. It was such a complete inversion of reality that several crew members actually shook their heads in disbelief. But Alison's response was steady and dignified. "I'm sorry you feel that way, because that's certainly not what I intended. I've tried to approach this conversation with the same respect and care I bring to every interview. If I've somehow failed to communicate that respect, I genuinely apologize." Even in the face of completely unfounded accusations, she was taking responsibility and apologizing. It was the mark of someone who cared more about resolving conflict than about being right. Someone who understood that sometimes the gracious response was more important than the justified one. Prince Harry stared at her for a long moment, and for just an instant, something flickered in his expression. Perhaps recognition of how unreasonable he was being, or acknowledgement of the grace she was showing him. But whatever moment of clarity might have been emerging was quickly overwhelmed by his determination to remain aggrieved. "Your apology doesn't change the fact that this entire format is designed to exploit people," he said coldly. "You bring people on, ask them invasive questions, and then broadcast their responses to millions of strangers. How is that not exploitation?" Alison nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering his perspective. "I understand why someone might see it that way, and I think it's a fair question to raise. But I'd like to think that what we do here is create opportunities for meaningful connection. When our guests share their experiences, it helps viewers who might be going through similar challenges feel less alone. When they talk about causes they care about, it inspires others to get involved and make a difference." She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the warm, conversational tone that had made her a household name. "That's not exploitation, that's community building. That's using the platform we've been given to make the world a little bit better, one conversation at a time." It was a beautiful response, articulating the higher purpose behind what many people dismissed as mere entertainment. But Prince Harry seemed immune to both her sincerity and her logic. "Community building?" Prince Harry's voice dripped with contempt. "You call prying into people's personal trauma community building? That's the most manipulative thing I've ever heard. You're not building community, you're feeding voyeurism." The studio atmosphere had become so tense that even the usually bustling production area had gone completely silent. Everyone could sense that something was about to break, that the interview was teetering on the edge of complete disaster. But Alison Hammond, showing the resilience that had carried her through decades in television, refused to give up on finding common ground. "I can see we have very different perspectives on this," she said calmly. "And I respect that you feel strongly about protecting people's privacy. That's actually something I admire. But I wonder if we might find some middle ground here. What would meaningful conversation look like to you? How could we use this platform in a way that feels positive and constructive?" It was yet another attempt to redirect the conversation towards something productive. Another opportunity for Prince Harry to step back from the confrontational path he had chosen. Alison was essentially asking him to help her, help him, to collaborate in creating the kind of interview he claimed to want. But Prince Harry seemed determined to reject every overture. "You want to know what meaningful conversation looks like?" he said, his voice rising dangerously. "It looks like not putting people on display like zoo animals for public entertainment. It looks like respecting boundaries instead of constantly pushing for more personal details to feed your ratings." The accusation about ratings was particularly unfair. This Morning had always prioritized substance over sensationalism, focusing on stories that mattered rather than chasing cheap thrills. But Prince Harry seemed intent on painting Alison and her show in the worst possible light. Alison's response was measured but firm. "I have to push back on that characterization, Harry. Our viewers aren't looking for entertainment at anyone's expense. They're looking for connection, for understanding, for hope. When people share their stories here, it's because they want to make a difference in other people's lives." She gestured toward the cameras, speaking directly to the millions watching at home. "Our audience is made up of real people dealing with real challenges. They tune in because they're looking for inspiration, for practical advice, for the comfort of knowing they're not alone in their struggles. That's not voyeurism. That's human connection at its most basic level." Prince Harry's face had grown progressively redder throughout her response, and when she finished speaking, he exploded with a fury that shocked everyone in the studio. "Connection?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the studio walls. "You call this connection? Sitting here having my motives questioned and my work dismissed by someone who makes a living off other people's pain? This is exactly the kind of media manipulation that destroyed my mother's life." The mention of his mother sent a chill through the entire studio. Everyone knew the tragic history, the way Princess Diana had been hounded by media attention. But to invoke that tragedy as a weapon against Alison Hammond, who had shown nothing but respect and professionalism, was both unfair and deeply inappropriate. Alison's voice remained steady, but those who knew her well could hear the slight tremor of emotion. "Harry, I would never want to cause you that kind of pain, and I'm deeply sorry that this conversation has brought up such difficult memories. That was never my intention, and if I've contributed to that hurt in any way, I sincerely apologize." Even faced with an explosive outburst and a deeply hurtful comparison, she was still trying to show compassion and understanding. It was a remarkable display of grace under pressure, the kind of response that separated true professionals from those who simply occupied prominent positions. But Prince Harry was beyond reason now. "Your apologies are meaningless," he shouted, standing up from his chair so abruptly that it nearly toppled over. "You people are all the same. You pretend to care, you pretend to be supportive, but you're just vultures feeding off other people's tragedy." The word vultures hit the studio like a physical blow. Several crew members actually stepped back, as if trying to distance themselves from the toxic energy radiating from the prince. This was no longer just a difficult interview. This was a complete breakdown happening in front of millions of viewers. Alison remained seated, her voice calm but authoritative. "Harry, I understand you're upset, but I think we need to take a step back here. These accusations are simply not true, and they're not fair to the hardworking people who make this show possible every day." For the first time in the entire interview, she was directly challenging his behavior rather than trying to accommodate it. It was a subtle but significant shift, the moment when patience and professionalism gave way to the need to protect her team and her show's integrity. Prince Harry's response was immediate and explosive. "Fair?" he screamed, his face now completely red with rage. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that you people destroyed my family? Is it fair that you turned my mother's death into entertainment? Is it fair that you're trying to do the same thing to me right now?" He was now pacing behind his chair, gesticulating wildly, completely out of control. "You sit there with your fake smile and your rehearsed sympathy, pretending you care about people while you're really just trying to get them to break down on camera for your viewers' entertainment. The production team behind the cameras was in crisis mode now. Producers were speaking urgently into their headsets, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or continue filming what was rapidly becoming one of the most shocking moments in British television history. Alison stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and calm in stark contrast to Prince Harry's frantic energy. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that commanded attention throughout the studio. "I'm going to have to ask you to stop right there," she said firmly. "You are completely out of line, and these accusations are not only false, but deeply hurtful to people who have dedicated their careers to serving the public good. I will not sit here and allow you to attack my colleagues and my show based on your own personal frustrations." It was the first time in the entire interview that she had directly confronted his behavior, and the effect was immediate. Prince Harry stopped pacing and stared at her, seemingly shocked that someone had finally pushed back against his tirade. "You're asking me to stop?" he said incredulously. "You invite me here, attack me with your questions, dismiss my concerns, and then tell me to stop when I finally defend myself?" Alison's response was swift and decisive. "What I'm asking you to stop is making false accusations against hardworking professionals who have shown you nothing but respect and courtesy. What I'm asking you to stop is using your platform to spread misinformation about the media industry and the people who work in it." She paused, looking directly into his eyes with the kind of steady gaze that had made her one of Britain's most respected broadcasters. "And what I'm asking you to stop is using your mother's memory as a weapon against people who had nothing to do with what happened to her." The studio fell completely silent. Prince Harry stared at Alison for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't quite process what she had said. Then, without warning, he erupted into the most shocking display of the entire morning. "How dare you?" he screamed at the top of his lungs. "How dare you tell me how to honor my mother's memory? You have no right, no understanding, no concept of what my family has been through because of people like you." He swept his arm across the small table between them, sending water glasses and papers flying across the studio floor. The crash of breaking glass echoed through the building as production staff jumped back in alarm. "This interview is over," he shouted, ripping off his microphone and throwing it to the ground. "I will not sit here and be lectured by someone who profits off human misery." And with that, Prince Harry stormed out of the studio, leaving behind a scene of complete chaos and a television host who had maintained her dignity and professionalism even in the face of the most unreasonable behavior imaginable. Alison Hammond stood quietly amid the wreckage, proving once again why she remained one of Britain's most beloved and respected broadcasters.